One of the biggest mysteries in Shadow of the Erdtree is a huge arc behind the Shadow Keep and beneath the Shadow Tree. Looming in the horizon, you can see this huge monument, but it doesn't end there. The monument is protected by Commander Gaius, a remembrance boss and a close friend to Mesmer himself. Behind the arc, we can find a chalice used to collect the sap of the Shadow Tree. It seems there is no meaning behind this monument, just a visual game design. But I believe this arc is hiding a huge secret. By looking at its real-life inspiration, the Arc de Triomphe, we can decipher its mysteries. What is the purpose of the arc, and what is the relation between the French aviator Charles Godfrey and our first Elden Lord, Lord Godfrey? In 1919, the French aviator Charles Godfrey was the first and the last human being to fly through the Arc de Triomphe. Is this a coincidence? I believe FromSoft is trying to tell us something. Let me explain. A triumphal arch is a monumental structure pierced by at least one arched passageway and erected to honor an important person or to commemorate a significant event. Those arcs were sometimes architecturally isolated but usually was built to span either a street or a roadway. In Elden Ring, the arc is isolated and behind it we can find a chalice. The chalice is used to collect the sap of the Shadow Tree. In real life, the triumphal arcs were Roman in origin, but they shouldn't be confused with the ceremonial gates, through which the victorious Roman army had to pass before entering the sacred city territory of Rome. So the Arc of Elden Ring was used to commemorate a significant event or an important person. It wasn't used as some kind of gateway. Writings interpreted those arcs to be an honorary monument of unusual importance. The original Roman arcs had 3 archways to them, while the more modern ones has only one. The most famous of modern triumphal arcs is the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. This arc has only one archway up front, which seems to be the inspiration for the in-game triumphal arcs instead of the original Roman arcs. Going to the Arc de Triomphe, it was constructed by Napoleon I to celebrate his military achievements, but he died before it was finished. The arc was finished in 1836 during the reign of King Louis Philippe, but the most important date for us is 1919. Because on 7 August 1919, a French aviator was the first and last man ever to fly through the archway of the arc. The aviator name was Charles Godfrey, and in other records it was Charles Godefroy. Of course, we know that Godefroy is a derivative name from Godfrey, and it's also the case in Elden Ring, with everyone's favorite mini-boss, Godefroy the Grafted. Returning back to the arc, I believe it's not a coincidence. Just like Charles Godfrey passed through the Arc de Triomphe, Lord Godfrey walked through the Shadowlands arc. Remember what was the original usage of the Triumphal Arc? It was built to commemorate a significant event or an important person. This arc was built for Hoarah, but why? And what does the sap chalice behind the arc have to do with it? The chalice behind the arc is used to collect the bounty of the Shadow Tree, its precious sap. The sap was very important to the reign of Marika. It contained primal life energies. It provided life and power for those who drink from it. The sap was actually used to spread the faith in the Erdtree and Marika's reign. But it had one more usage. It was used to bestow lordship. Let's read the Talisman of Lord's Bestowal together. A talisman depicting Godfrey, first Elden Lord, receiving the precious sap. The Lord accepted the sap stoically, without any sign of wavering. No wonder Lord of the Erdtree casts a long shadow over the lands. The talisman is depicting the moment of Godfrey accepting the sap. But what does that description mean? Why would Godfrey hesitate about accepting the sap? Why would he waver? I believe this talisman is talking about the moment where Hoarah became Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. And in that context, the arc and the chalice behind it would make absolute sense. The arc was built to commemorate that moment, The moment where Horalu, Lord of the Battlefields, would walk through it and accept the sap of the Earth Tree collected by the chalice. And that would explain why Horalu could have wavered. He was going to give up his true nature. Horalu was going to be buried forever under Godfrey. The Godfrey icon gives us more insight. Godfrey was a ferocious warrior. When he vowed to become a lord, he took the beast regent Sirosh upon his back to suppress the ceaseless lust for battle that raged within. If the arc is made to commemorate that moment, then that event was the time when Godfrey took Sirosh upon his back. He gave up being himself, Horalu. He also gave up many other things, but to truly understand, we must try to piece out the history of Horalu. Little is known about the origins of Horalu. Before the DLC, the major theory Horalu was from the Highlands, a place where axes, roars, and barbaric fighting styles was used. The major evidence regarding that theory is the Highland axe. The axe is found in Stormvale Castle beneath a large portrait of Godfrey. The axe also buffs roar attacks. Another supporting point is the removed Highland armor. The armor talked about the Highlands and connected it to Godfrey, but the armor was removed before the release of the game. Now after the DLC, the theory became much more stronger in my opinion. We got the Highland armor back. Let's read its description together. Traditional garb of the Highland warriors, made from woven fabric and finished with a blue patterned cloth. Highland warriors are known to be hunters of bears. To them, there is no act more glorious than the subjugation of a savage beast. From that description, we can notice a couple of things. First, the Highland armor is signified by blue patterned cloth. In matter of fact, this blue cloth reminds me a lot of the Elden Lord armor. Let's see them side by side. Second, those Highlanders used to hunt bears, and to them there was no act more glorious than that of the subjugation of a beast. Let's split this into two parts. The bears and the subjugation of beasts. The way I view it, the fighting style of the Highlanders followed the fighting style of bears. Due to the constant exposure to the bears that they hunted, they became influenced by it. We ourselves can achieve something close to this with the usage of bear communion and the bear claw weapon. But what's much more interesting to me behind all of this is the fighting style of a certain character. A character that slash, lunge, and grab his enemies. A character that fights like a bear. Of course, I'm talking about Horalu. I believe the fighting style of Horalu is a clear evidence of the origins of Godfrey as a Highlander. Now to the second part, we are told that the subjugation of a beast was the most glorious act a Highlander can do. This line made me ask a question. What if someone subjugated not just a beast, but the Lord of Beasts, Sirosh? The Lord of Beasts was Sirosh according to the Beast Claw Great Hammer. So here is what I'm proposing. Horalu was a ferocious Highland warrior, and through taming Sirosh, he became their chieftain, or he was already their chieftain. This is an important part for later, but at the moment we need to establish the importance of taming Sirosh and the connection between all of this and the Horn Scent. We already know the status that the divine beasts have in the Tower culture. In matter of fact, the entirety of the culture is built around the divine beasts and the divine invocation. In my opinion, Sirosh was actually one, if not the most important divine beast. And Horalu gained unparalleled status by subjugating Sirosh. But is there any evidence that supports this? I believe so. Hear me out. One of the new spirit ashes we get in Shadow of the Earth Tree is divine bird warrior Ornis. Ornis isn't just a bird warrior like the ones we find in the Shadowlands. He was actually the original and the inspiration behind them. Let's read the description together. A spirit of the divine bird warrior from whom the horned warriors claim descent, clad in golden armor and granted wings and feathers by divine invocation. Ornis succeeded in taming the divine bird and made its wings his own as he soared through the sky. When he finally fell to earth, he lived on as the guardian deity of the temple quarter. So Ornis was the inspiration behind the Horned Warriors, as he was able to tame the divine bird. But Ornis wasn't the only inspiration. From that context, we can conclude that taming the divine bird gave Ornis his status. So what about taming the Lord of the Beasts? Going to the Horned Warrior armor, we can read something incredibly interesting. This armor reads as follows: Armor of the Horned Warriors, Keepers of the Tower. The Oka fabric is draped over a chest piece made to resemble the unclothed form of a hero from older times. It's really clear that Ornis isn't unclothed. It's actually in the description that he wears a golden armor. So there was another inspiration behind the Horned Warriors, an unclothed hero that subjugated a divine beast, Horalu. I believe both Ornis and Horalu were an incredibly high-status characters in the Tower culture. Not just that, they may have actually been related. Let's speculate a little. We know that Ornis tamed the divine bird, but who is the divine bird? He may or may not be a character that we know, but if he is a character that we encountered, then I firmly believe he may actually be the Stormhawk King. The Stormhawk King is a key item in Nephili questline. We can acquire the Spirit Ash and give it to her, to uplift her from the state of depression that took over her. She recognizes the Stormhawk King. Actually, her tribe seems to uphold the Stormhawks in high regards. Worth noting that Nephili is claiming descendants from Horalu himself, evident by her name and the hero class description. If that is true, then she is a Highlander as well. But why would the Highlanders hold the Stormhawk King in high regard? First, because he is the king of the birds and they are centered around taming beasts. But I believe that more importantly than this is the fact that the Stormhawk King was a divine bird that Ornis tamed. Ornis was a Highlander as well. You can actually see some very interesting contrast here. Horalu tamed Lord of the Beasts, while Ornis tamed the Lord of the Birds. And in that context, we would understand why Ornis took that dangerous initiative. Like Horalu, being a Highlander meant that you lived to subjugate beasts. It was the greatest honor. That's why he went after the Stormhawk King. Let's read the Stormhawk King description together. Ashes of a hawk, revered by all others as a sovereign back in the days when Stormveil's wind still raged like no other. This ancient monarch is proud, however, refusing to answer anyone's summon. Putting that with Ornis' description, we can understand much more. Ornis was the first and the last person to tame the prideful Stormhawk King. After Ornis fell from the sky, the Stormhawk refused in pride any other attempt of subjugating him. Again, we can see the contrast here between Horalu and Ornis. Horalu as well was the first and the last to subjugate Siraj. Going back to the Tower culture, we already established how well regarded was Ornis and Horalu. Horalu was deep into the Hornsen culture. This would explain the Crucible Knights being his personal army. He led them himself. It would also explain why he loved Morgoth and Mohg. In contrast to Marika, who hated them because they were Omen, Godfrey didn't really care. He didn't have any problem with the Tower and Crucible culture. He actually was one of them at a certain moment in time, a highly regarded hero of unparalleled status. Probably a user of divine invocation as well. After all, he has Siraj by his side. We were told that divine invocation granted unhuman strength to the guardians of the Tower. Imagine what that would do with someone as powerful as Horalu to begin with. That would actually explain a couple of mysteries here. It would explain why the Horn-sent Grand Dame calls Marika a strumpet on several occasions. It would also explain why she is so pissed about who Marika slept with. In Grand Dame's eyes, she stole Horalu and Siraj from the Horn-sent. She turned him into Lord Godfrey and became her weapon. She also may have called her a strumpet because while stealing Horalu from them, she was having an affair with Radagon. They probably didn't know who Radagon truly was. Good for them. In that context, the way Grand Dam seems to be offended personally from Marika being a strumpet would make a lot of sense. Also, this may have ties with the word seduction in the trailer. I believe it may be one of the meanings behind the word. Seducing Horalu, who was a horn-sent hero, and turning him into Godfrey. After establishing all of this, we can return once more to the most important event in Godfrey's life, the moment of his crowning. Passing through the archway of the Ark and standing in front of the chalice. Now, we would understand fully why the talisman is talking about Godfrey not hesitating or wavering. He had all the reasons in the world to hesitate and waver. He was going to renounce everything. He was going to get rid of Horalu and become Godfrey. He was going to take Surash on his back for the rest of his life. He probably knew what was going to happen to the Horn-Sent, his previous allies. And most importantly, we know that drinking from a flask actually had negative effects on divine invocation. The flask actually contains the Earth Tree's sap. So by accepting the sap of the Earth Tree, Godfrey was getting rid of divine invocation, a big source of his power. But he would gain the power of the blessed sap. I already made a video about the Earth Tree and the sap. Check it out after this video. So Godfrey had all the reasons in the world to hesitate, but he didn't. The Lord accepted the sap stoically without any sign of wavering. No wonder Lord of the Earth Tree casts a long shadow over the lands. Now let's talk briefly of the events after the crowning. As we already established, Horalu was a chieftain of the Highlanders. So after becoming Godfrey, his troops was added to the army of Marika. Godfrey himself became her warlord and started the war against the fire giants. A very important detail is the soldiers of Mizmer. Those soldiers have two variations. One wields a spear and the other wields an axe. The spear wielders seems to be inspired by Mizmer, while the axe wielder's fighting style mimics that of Godfrey himself. This reminds me a lot of the story of Daenerys and Drogo from Song of Ice and Fire, or the more famous adaptation, Game of Thrones. Drogo was a warlord that led a big army of barbarians. He was known as a man that never knew defeat, just like Godfrey was a lord of the battlefield. Later on, he used his army to help Daenerys in her conquest. I believe the axe wielders are actually some of the troops of Godfrey. The influence of J.R.R.M. Martin on Elden Ring seems quite big regarding the story of Marika and Godfrey. Even if those troops don't belong to Godfrey, they are certainly inspired by him. We have many items that talks about the same effect Godfrey had on his troops. The axe talisman reads as follows: "The Lord who led the long march bore an axe, and his loyal warriors honored him by wielding axes of their own, making them very effective at dealing decisive blows." Actually, the axe talisman looks a lot like Mizmer soldiers, and the two of them looks a lot like the Highlanders' leather crown. All of this put together, it seems logical to assume that those troops were given to Mizmer by Godfrey. The story of Elden Ring is told in a very mysterious way, taking inspiration from real-life architecture, history, and other media by the same creators. Hopefully in this video I explained a part of it in a good way. If you enjoyed, then please like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Until next video, farewell, fellow Tarnished.